I raised my daughter with my blood, sweat, and tears. At her wedding, her new father-in-law threw a glass of ice water directly into my face in front of 900 elite guests. The entire ballroom went dead silent. I stood there dripping wet, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Do you really know who you just insulted?"
Welcome to Father's Vengeance Chronicles. Before we continue with today's story, please take a moment to support us by giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us and gives us the motivation to bring you more powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories every single day. We would also love to hear your thoughts. Please share your feelings, opinions, or reactions in the comments below, and don't forget to include the hashtag #FathersVengeanceChronicles. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for becoming a valued part of our storytelling community.
His smug, arrogant smile vanished. My name is Richard Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and this is the story of how my only daughter's perfect fairy tale wedding exposed a dark, calculating nightmare I never saw coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who drastically underestimated your worth. The ice-cold water hit me before I even saw the crystal glass move. 1 second I was trying to navigate my way across the crowded, dimly lit dance floor to get a better view of my daughter, and the very next second, a freezing shock knocked the breath right out of my lungs. My vision blurred as the freezing liquid dripped heavily from my eyelashes, soaking instantly into the stiff collar of my rented tuxedo. The lively, upbeat jazz band that had been playing a classic tune abruptly stopped. The final high-pitched note of the saxophone hung awkwardly and painfully in the air, creating a tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. 900 of Boston's absolute elite guests turned their heads to look. The massive, opulent hall fell into a dead, suffocating silence. You could have heard a single pin drop on the polished marble floor. Standing less than 2 feet away from me was Victor Kensington, my daughter Sarah's new father-in-law. He was holding the now empty crystal glass in his right hand. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Watch where you are going, you uncultured mechanic." Victor spat out, his voice booming and echoing clearly across the completely silent ballroom. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You just stepped on my wife's custom designer gown with your filthy boots. You clearly do not belong here, and you never did." The whispers started immediately. It was like the hissing of 100 snakes. I could feel the heavy, judgmental stares of the politicians, the hedge fund managers, and the old money socialites burning into my skin. They looked at me exactly the way Victor did, like I was a stray dog that had somehow wandered into a royal palace. I did not scream. I did not raise my hands in defense. I did not retaliate in a blind fit of anger. I just stood there, an old man who looked entirely out of place, and I stared right back at Victor Kensington. My hands were permanently calloused from decades of hard labor. My shoulders were slightly hunched from years of carrying the weight of the world. But my mind was sharper than anyone in that ballroom could possibly comprehend. I reached into my pocket, slowly pulled out a simple cotton handkerchief, and quietly wiped the freezing water from my eyes and my cheeks. While I stood there taking his public verbal abuse, a bitter, intensely ironic thought crossed my mind. If Victor only knew the actual truth, his fragile, arrogant reality would shatter into a million jagged pieces. In that painfully silent moment, I thought about the $500,000 I had anonymously wired to the elite wedding planners just 3 months ago to pay for this exact event. Every single imported white orchid decorating this room, every drop of vintage champagne bubbling in their expensive crystal glasses, the imported caviar, the renowned jazz band, the rental of this historic Boston estate, I paid for all of it. Every single dime. Why did I do it anonymously? Because my 28-year-old daughter Sarah had begged me to. "Dad, please," she had pleaded with me months ago, tears welling up in her beautiful eyes. Preston's family is very particular. They are Boston high society. They have a reputation to maintain among their peers. If I let them handle the event planning and the finances, they will finally accept me as one of their own. Please, Dad, just let them take the credit. I want this fairy tale to be perfect. I raised Sarah completely alone after her mother passed away, when she was just a little girl. She was my entire world. I never could say no to her. So I became the invisible benefactor. I let the arrogant Kensingtons pretend they were graciously funding the wedding of the decade. I gave them a blank check, and I happily took a back seat. I sat quietly at a small table in the far corner of the room, dressed like a poor, retired, blue-collar worker, trying not to take up too much space. They thought I was just a grease monkey, a charity case given a pity seat out of social obligation. They had absolutely no idea that I was the founder and sole anonymous owner of Cole Logistics, a global shipping empire I built from absolute scratch with nothing but my own 2 hands. They had no idea my actual net worth was over $2 billion. I was the wealthiest man in that room by a massive, undeniable margin. Yet here I was, standing soaked and publicly humiliated, taking the brunt of Victor Kensington's manufactured aristocratic rage. I waited for the groom to intervene. I waited for Preston, my smooth-talking new son-in-law, to step between us, to calm his raging father down, to defend the man who had raised the woman he supposedly loved. Preston hurried over, pushing his way through the crowd of stunned, whispering guests. But he did not look angry at his father. He looked furious with me. Instead of de-escalating the situation or asking if I was all right, Preston grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, his fingers digging painfully into my bicep as he aggressively shoved me toward the heavy exit doors. "You are embarrassing, Sarah." Preston hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "You are ruining our perfect night. You need to leave. Leave right now." I pulled my arm out of his violent grip and turned my head to look for Sarah. I needed to see my daughter. I needed her to step forward to say something to stop this absolute madness. I spotted her standing near the massive 5-tier wedding cake. She was wearing the white silk dress I had quietly paid for. Her face was deathly pale, her hands visibly trembling as she clutched her bridal bouquet. Our eyes met across the silent, staring crowd. For one agonizing second, I waited for her to run to me, to push Preston away, to tell them they were wrong. Instead, she started weeping, covered her mouth with her hands, and looked away. She just looked away. My own daughter, the child I had sacrificed my entire life to protect, chose to stand in silence while I was thrown out like common garbage. The message was brutally clear. I was a stain on her perfect new elite life. I did not say another word. I turned my back on the cruel murmurs, the fake pity, and the smug smirks of the Kensington family. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the ballroom and walked out into the freezing Boston night. The cold, heavy rain began to fall immediately, soaking through my cheap, rented jacket, mixing with the water still dripping from my face. As I stood alone on the wet pavement, waiting for my battered old pickup truck to be brought around by the confused valet, a terrifying, undeniable realization began to settle deep in my gut. This public humiliation was not an accident. It was a calculated test. And the true nightmare was only just beginning. The freezing rain soaked through my thin cotton shirt, sticking it uncomfortably to my skin. I stood under the grand awning of the estate, shivering slightly, waiting for the valet to bring around my 1998 Ford F-150. The valet, a young kid in a sharp red vest, had given me a look of pure confusion when I handed him the keys earlier that evening. It was the only battered vehicle parked among a sea of imported luxury cars, a stark reminder of the disguise I had chosen to wear. My jaw was clenched so tight, my teeth ached. I could still feel the phantom sensation of Victor Kensington's ice water dripping down my neck. I kept my eyes fixed on the wet asphalt, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. My daughter had looked away. That was the wound that bled the most. The public humiliation meant nothing to me. I had survived cutthroat boardroom battles and ruthless corporate takeovers that would make Victor weep like a child. But Sarah turning her back on me, that was a blade straight to the heart. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors behind me pushed open. The warm golden light from the ballroom spilled out onto the wet pavement, accompanied by the muffled sound of the jazz band starting up again. They were already moving on. Preston hurried out into the cold, pulling his tailored tuxedo jacket tight against the rain. He spotted me and immediately jogged over, his face twisted into a mask of deep, frantic concern. It was a perfect performance. If I did not know any better, I would have thought he actually cared. "Richard," he breathed out, panting slightly, as if he had run a marathon to find me. He placed a warm, manicured hand on my damp shoulder. I did not shrug it off, but I did not lean into it either. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch until it became heavy and uncomfortable. "I am so incredibly sorry about what just happened in there," Preston said, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You have to understand, my father is not in his right mind tonight. He recently started a new prescription for a serious heart condition. The doctors explicitly told him not to mix it with alcohol, but he has been drinking vintage scotch all evening to celebrate. It caused a severe manic episode. He does not even know what he is saying or doing right now." I stared into Preston's perfectly clear, calculating brown eyes. It was a flawless, plausible lie. A manic episode caused by medication and alcohol. It was the perfect excuse to quickly sweep a horrific public insult right under the rug. It painted Victor as a victim of his own health rather than a cruel, arrogant bully. "Please, Dad." Preston continued using the familial title with a smooth, practiced ease that made my stomach churn. "I know you are hurt, and you have every right to be angry. But please try to understand the pressure I am under right now. This is my wedding night. Sarah is inside having a complete panic attack in the bridal suite. I am trying to hold my entire family together. I just need you to be the bigger person tonight. Please go back to your hotel, get some warm clothes, and rest. I personally promise you that I will bring my father to your room first thing tomorrow morning, and he will give you the deepest, most sincere apology of his life." He squeezed my shoulder one last time, playing the role of the exhausted, stressed groom protecting his fragile bride. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He was asking me to swallow my pride for the sake of my daughter's happiness. He knew I would do anything for Sarah. "I will go to my hotel," I said quietly, my voice betraying absolutely no emotion. Preston let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. "Thank you, Richard. Thank you for understanding. I promise I will make this right tomorrow." He turned and rushed back into the warmth of the ballroom, leaving me alone in the dark once again. The valet finally pulled my old truck up to the curb. I climbed inside, the worn leather seat creaking familiarly under my weight. I turned the key, listening to the engine roar to life, and drove away from the glowing estate. The drive back to downtown Boston was a blur of neon lights and sweeping windshield wipers. The heater in the truck blasted warm air, but the chill had settled deep into my bones. I kept replaying Preston's words in my head. His story was convenient. It was almost too perfect. But a father's love is a dangerous blinder, and I desperately wanted to believe that Sarah had not married a monster. I wanted to believe it was just a terrible misunderstanding. I drove to the Four Seasons, the luxury hotel where I had booked a grand suite for the weekend. I had used a generic travel agency to keep my wealth hidden, ensuring the reservation looked like a modest gift from a distant relative. I tossed my keys to the hotel valet, walked through the pristine glass doors, and crossed the sprawling marble lobby. My wet boots squeaked embarrassingly against the polished floor, drawing judgmental looks from the late-night patrons. I did not care. I just wanted a hot shower and a quiet place to think. I approached the mahogany front desk and handed the clerk my driver's license. "Good evening," I said, my voice rough from the cold. "I need a key to my room. The reservation is under Richard Caldwell." The young clerk, dressed in a sharp suit, tapped quickly on his keyboard. He frowned, adjusted his glasses, and typed again. His polite customer service smile slowly faded into a look of genuine awkwardness. "I am very sorry, Mr. Caldwell," the clerk said, hesitantly, avoiding my eyes. "But it appears your reservation was cancelled earlier this evening." I stared at him, the buzzing noise of the lobby suddenly fading away. Cancelled. That is impossible. I paid for the suite a month ago. I checked in yesterday. My luggage is currently sitting upstairs in the room. The clerk typed furiously, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Sir, the notes in our system indicate that the cancellation was requested exactly 2 hours ago. It was authorized by the designated event coordinator for the Kensington wedding party. A Mr. Preston Kensington called us directly. He stated there was a sudden family emergency and that you would no longer require the accommodations. A cold, heavy knot formed tightly in the pit of my stomach. Preston. He canceled my room. What about my belongings? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet octave. The clerk swallowed hard. Mr. Kensington arranged for a private courier service to pack your belongings and transfer them. He provided us with a new address. Your bags were sent to a motel near the interstate highway about 20 miles outside the city limits. He said he had already discussed this relocation with you. I stood completely frozen at the mahogany desk. The plausible lie that Preston sold me in the rain was broken. This was no random drunken accident. It was a cold, calculated eviction to isolate me. I felt a sudden clarity wash over me as the truth settled deep in my weary bones. My daughter was in terrible, immediate danger. The cheap motel near the interstate was everything the front desk clerk had promised. It was a bleak, rundown box with peeling floral wallpaper and a distinct lingering odor of stale cigarette smoke mixed with cheap bleach. Rain hammered relentlessly against the single grime-stained window, casting distorted, moving shadows across the threadbare carpet. My luggage, a pair of worn canvas duffel bags, sat unceremoniously piled at the foot of a lumpy mattress. I did not bother unpacking. I did not even take off my damp tuxedo jacket. I just sat on the edge of the bed staring at the flickering red neon sign flashing outside the window. The loud noise of the heavy transport trucks driving on the wet asphalt outside provided a steady, monotonous rhythm to my racing thoughts. I desperately needed absolute silence tonight, but I forced my tired mind to focus. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it all began to sink in, pushing past the initial shock and settling into a cold, hard knot in my chest. Victor Kensington had not just lost his temper. A man like Victor, obsessed with his fragile social standing, does not cause a massive, humiliating public scene at his own son's wedding unless there is a very specific, carefully designed reason for it. Preston canceling my hotel room was not an act of a stressed groom trying to keep the peace. It was a surgical strike. They wanted me out of the picture. They wanted me entirely isolated, pushed to the margins where I could not interfere. But why? My mind, trained by decades of ruthless corporate warfare, began to turn the problem over and over. I closed my eyes and let my intuition guide me. I began to meticulously analyze Preston's behavior over the last 6 months. When he first started dating Sarah, he played the role of the perfect, attentive gentleman. He brought me expensive bottles of whiskey I pretended to be impressed by, and he always made a show of asking for my fatherly advice. But looking back, I could see the subtle, insidious shifts. Once they got engaged, Preston slowly began building invisible walls around my daughter. He convinced Sarah to quit her demanding but fulfilling job as an architect, insisting that his income was more than enough, and that she should focus on planning their life together. Then came the sudden relocation. He pushed her to move out of the vibrant city apartment I had helped her furnish, isolating her in a sprawling, heavily gated Kensington family estate in the suburbs. She was surrounded by his people, his influence, his narrative. Her calls to me became less frequent, always rushed, always echoing Preston's opinions. Dad, Preston thinks we should invest in this. Dad, Preston says this neighborhood is not safe for me anymore. He was slowly, methodically replacing her independent voice with his own. He was severing her lifelines one by one, making himself her only source of truth and security. I had chalked it up to the overwhelming stress of wedding planning and the natural transition of a new marriage. I had been a fool. The signs were blaring like sirens. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I remembered the exact moment I had felt this profound, icy dread before. It was just 1 week ago. I was visiting Sarah at the Kensington estate, sharing a quiet cup of coffee with her on the patio, while Preston was supposedly running errands. We were laughing about an old childhood memory when Preston suddenly marched outside, interrupting us with a tight, artificial smile. He was carrying a thick, unmarked manila folder. He leaned down, kissed Sarah gently on the cheek, and placed the folder on the glass table between us. "Darling," he had said smoothly, his voice dripping with faux affection, "my accountant needs these signed by noon today. It is just some routine tax disclosures for your change in marital status. Standard paperwork for the joint accounts. Do not worry your pretty head about the details, just sign on the dotted lines." Sarah, completely trusting and eager to please her new husband, had reached for her pen without a single moment of hesitation. She flipped open the folder and began rapidly signing page after page, not reading a single word of the dense legal jargon. I was sitting right there across from them. I had casually glanced down at the documents as she flipped the pages. At the time, I did not want to be the overbearing, paranoid father. I did not want to insult Preston by demanding to read his private financial documents. But my eyes had caught a fleeting glimpse of the heavy embossed logo at the top of the crisp white pages. It was the crest of a highly exclusive private wealth management bank in Boston. It was not just any bank. It was the exact institution that held Sarah's $10 million trust fund. I had set up that specific trust fund for her 20 years ago, carefully securing her financial future in a way that she could easily access once she married or turned 30. Sarah knew about the $10 million. She believed it was the entirety of my life savings, a massive windfall from a lucky early investment. She thought I lived modestly because I had given her everything I had. She had absolutely no idea that her father was worth over $2 billion and that the trust fund was barely a fraction of my actual wealth. Preston knew about the trust. Sarah had proudly told him about it, believing it would help them start their life together. But Preston did not know about the $2 billion. He thought the $10 million was the ceiling. And men like Preston, men with expensive tastes and failing family fortunes, do not view $10 million as a foundation. They view it as a target. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. The documents Sarah signed a week ago were not standard tax forms. They were legal authorizations. Preston was moving her assets. But to execute a massive sudden transfer of a $10 million trust without raising immediate red flags, he needed Sarah completely isolated. He needed to ensure I was not around, to ask questions, to demand an audit, or to step in and freeze the accounts. He needed me disgraced, discredited, and physically removed from the inner circle. The humiliating scene with Victor, the water thrown in my face, the canceled hotel room. It was all a highly orchestrated, desperate distraction. They were keeping everyone focused on the social scandal while they quietly robbed my daughter blind. I stood up from the lumpy mattress. The coldness in my bones was instantly replaced by a burning, laser-focused rage. I walked over to the dirty window and looked out at the pouring rain. They really thought I was just a tired old mechanic who would quietly disappear into the night and lick his wounds. They thought they had outsmarted a simpleton. They had absolutely no idea what kind of monster they had just invited into their lives. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. I pulled my cell phone from my damp pocket, scrolled through my contacts, and tapped the name of a man who never slept. The line rang twice before a sharp, awake voice answered. "Jonathan." I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Wake up. We have a hunt." The line was quiet for a fraction of a second before Jonathan replied. His voice was sharp, instantly alert. "What do we need, Richard? Give me the target." I did not mince my words. I told him I needed a complete